Tonight, we're hearing from a mother who was shot along with her 2 children on Christmas Eve in Rosedale. One of those children, a 4-year-old boy, was killed in what police call a case of domestic violence.
This is my story.
We've blurred the stitches in Promyss Marcelle's head. She posted this video after she says her children's father shot her and them on Christmas Eve in their apartment in Rosedale, Baltimore County.
It was Christmas Eve in Rosedale, Maryland, a night meant for laughter, warmth, and the joy of family. But for one young mother and her children, the holiday spirit would be shattered in an instant. By dawn, the sound of gunfire would echo through the quiet apartment complex, leaving a trail of heartbreak and a question that still lingers. How did love and trust turn into such unimaginable tragedy? This is the story of Promyss Marcelle, her 2 children, and a night that changed everything. Promyss Marcelle had always dreamed of giving her children a better life, a life free from the shadows of abuse that had haunted her past. Little did she know, the man who had once promised to love her would become the person who would steal her happiness and threaten her family's future. Welcome to Crime Berry Stories. Subscribe and hit the notification bell icon for more stories. This story takes us to Rosedale, Maryland, United States. Rosedale, a quiet suburban community nestled in Baltimore County, is often characterized by its tree-lined streets, modest homes, and the everyday rhythms of family life. Known for its small-town charm and close-knit neighborhoods, Rosedale offers a sense of familiarity and safety to its residents. It's the kind of place where neighbors exchange greetings over white picket fences, and the hum of children playing in local parks is a staple of the evening air. Yet, beneath its serene facade, Rosedale is no stranger to the complexities and struggles that weave through the fabric of any community, including issues like domestic violence that often go unseen until they erupt into tragic headlines. As the early hours of December 24, 2024 unfolded, the tensions in Promyss Marcelle's home grew. What began as a heated argument quickly escalated into something far more horrific, a tragedy that would leave one child dead, another wounded, and a mother desperately clinging to life. What led to this unimaginable crime? And how could something so cruel happen on a night meant for celebration? Jacoby Jones, a bright and lively 4-year-old who loved dinosaurs. His laugh was infectious, and his energy filled the room wherever he went. He was the center of his mother's world, a child whose future should have been filled with schoolyard adventures, birthday parties, and the love of a family that cherished him. But Jacoby's future was stolen that night, and his innocence would never be returned. His mother, Promyss Marcelle, who had spent years trying to create a stable life for her children. She was a woman who worked tirelessly, often juggling multiple jobs to ensure her kids had what they needed. She dreamed of raising them in a home free from fear. But like so many others, Promyss found herself caught in a dangerous cycle, a toxic on-and-off relationship with Mark Jones, the father of her children. Mark Jones, a 30-year-old man. On the surface, he appeared to be a loving partner and father. However, beneath the surface, there were darker truths. Promyss had been involved with Mark for 5 years, a relationship fraught with tension, emotional manipulation, and periods of reconciliation followed by brutal fights. Despite the abuse, Promyss often felt trapped, unsure of how to escape the cycle of violence that had gripped her life. On the morning of December 24, 2024, Rosedale, a quiet suburban neighborhood, became the backdrop for a devastating crime. The family lived in an apartment complex on Breslin Court, a place that, like many suburban areas, was supposed to be a sanctuary for families to build their lives. The festive season should have meant joy and togetherness, but for Promyss and her children, it became the setting for something far darker. At 6 a.m., the day began just like any other. The air was cold, a typical December morning in Maryland. Promyss was asleep with her children when Mark Jones, who had been staying in the children's room, entered her bedroom. What followed was an argument that would escalate quickly, leading to the most unimaginable consequences. His presence was the beginning of an altercation, something that had happened before, but this time, it would spiral out of control. The argument began innocuously enough, with words exchanged. But soon, the tension between the two reached a breaking point. Jacoby, hearing the shouting, asked his father to leave the room, perhaps not fully understanding the gravity of the situation. But it was too late. The tension between Mark and Promyss had reached a boiling point. In the heat of the argument, Mark Jones, unable or unwilling to control his rage, pulled out a gun. In a moment of sheer terror, Mark fired at Promyss. The bullet grazed her head, but her survival instinct kicked in. As she stumbled toward the door, trying to escape the violence, Mark turned the gun on Jacoby. In an instant, the 4-year-old boy who had asked his father to leave was shot in the head, his life extinguished in the blink of an eye. Promyss, desperate to protect her youngest child, who had been shot in the shoulder, ran for her life. Bloodied and shaken, she fled the apartment, hoping to find help. She was a mother who had just watched her child die, and now she was fighting for her own survival. Meanwhile, Mark Jones, after committing the unthinkable, attempted to take his own life. His failed suicide attempt led to his hospitalization, where he would survive, leaving the community in shock as they learned of his actions. When the Baltimore County Police Department arrived at the Breslin Court apartment complex following Promyss's desperate call for help, they were met with a scene of chaos and heartbreak. The lifeless body of 4-year-old Jacoby Jones bore silent testimony to the violence that had unfolded. Promyss Marcelle, though injured, provided a first-hand account of the incident, detailing the escalation that led to the shootings. Her 1-year-old daughter, wounded but alive, was also present, adding to the urgency and gravity of the situation. As the investigation progressed, it became evident that this tragic event was not an isolated incident, but rather the culmination of a history marked by domestic discord. Law enforcement quickly interviewed Promyss, who had been rushed to safety, still in shock. She explained how, despite previous calls to the police regarding Mark's violent behavior, she had always been told there was little they could do. Tragically, this time, their intervention would come too late. This revelation underscores the systemic challenges faced by individuals in abusive relationships, where the lack of immediate evidence can impede preventive intervention. As the investigation continued, forensic evidence began to tell its own story. Police collected crucial evidence, including the weapon used in the shooting, and began to piece together the timeline of events leading up to the tragedy. Witness testimonies from neighbors who had heard the argument and shots fired further confirmed the horror that had taken place. Mark Jones was arrested upon his recovery from the hospital and charged with first-degree murder, attempted murder, and other crimes related to the shooting. As the case moved forward, the investigation continued to shine a light on the chilling details of that night. As the investigation into the tragic events of Christmas Eve began to unfold, law enforcement quickly discovered disturbing details about Mark Jones's past. A past that painted a troubling picture of domestic violence and potential warning signs that had been missed or ignored. Court documents show that just months before the shooting, in May 2023, Jones had been charged with assault using a firearm. The case was serious, yet incredibly, he pleaded guilty to second-degree assault and was sentenced to probation before judgment. This sentence meant that Jones avoided jail time, despite the violent nature of his actions. Even more troubling was the fact that earlier in 2023, Jones had been the subject of a temporary restraining order. In January 2023, a woman had sought legal protection against him after alleging domestic violence. The order was issued, but in a tragic twist, the petitioner withdrew the order just days later, leaving Mark Jones unchallenged and free to continue his pattern of abusive behavior. These previous incidents, his history of violence and the temporary restraining order, were key pieces of the puzzle that law enforcement would need to piece together. Was this just a moment of unprovoked rage, or was it the culmination of years of escalating abuse? For Promyss Marcelle, who had reached out to the police in the past, it was becoming painfully clear that Jones's violent tendencies had not been properly addressed. Yet, in the days leading up to the shooting, despite having reached out to authorities previously, Promyss's fears had not been enough to compel an immediate intervention. Authorities had been informed about Jones's violent history, but it seemed that the necessary action was delayed or disregarded. This gap in the system, this lack of protection, would become an ongoing point of reflection as the case continued to unfold. The severity of Mark Jones's actions left no room for doubt, and the community anxiously awaited justice. However, the path to accountability was not straightforward. Before the trial could proceed, an unexpected delay occurred. Mark Jones, after surviving his own suicide attempt, was hospitalized for his injuries. This medical setback postponed his initial court hearing, leaving Promyss Marcelle and the community in a painful limbo. For Promyss, each delay was a reminder of the system's slow march toward justice, a stark contrast to the swift and irreversible loss she had suffered. The case against Mark Jones was damning. The brutality of his actions and the overwhelming evidence painted a clear picture of guilt. Yet, the tragedy also underscored a harsh reality. Domestic violence is a silent epidemic, often hidden until it erupts in unimaginable ways. Experts would later highlight how the pressures of the holiday season, meant for family unity, can exacerbate underlying tensions in volatile relationships. For Promyss and her children, the joy of Christmas had been replaced with unimaginable pain. As the trial date approached, the community turned its focus to the courtroom. Mark Jones faced the prospect of life in prison if convicted. The defense, however, sought to redirect the narrative, claiming that Mark's severe mental health struggles played a role in his actions. They argued that his state of mind on Christmas Eve diminished his culpability. The prosecution, unwavering in their pursuit of justice, countered that no mental health challenges could justify the calculated act of taking Jacoby's life and inflicting so much harm on Promyss and her daughter. Their argument was clear. This was a deliberate act of violence that demanded accountability. While the legal system might deliver its verdict, for many, the true resolution would only come when the survivors of this tragedy found a way to heal. Promyss's journey was far from over, as she would have to rebuild her life and find ways to navigate the grief and loss that would forever define this chapter of her existence. The grief for this tragic event was not only felt by Promyss and her surviving children, but rippled through the community, which had already been shaken by this senseless act of violence. Jacoby, with his love for dinosaurs and his boundless energy, had been a young boy full of life, gone in an instant. The loss left a hole in the hearts of those who knew him, but it was his mother who would feel the weight of this loss the most. Promyss, in the midst of unspeakable heartbreak, took steps to honor her son's memory. She began an online fundraiser to help pay for Jacoby's funeral expenses, a campaign that had raised more than $30,000 in donations. The outpouring of support from strangers, many of whom had never met Jacoby, spoke to the collective grief of a community stunned by the brutality of what had occurred. In her heart-wrenching plea, Promyss shared her wish for Jacoby's funeral, which was scheduled for January 10th at the March Funeral Home in Randallstown. She wanted the world to know how much she loved her son. "I want everyone to come, even if I don't know you," she said, her voice full of emotion. "I just want my son to know how much his mom pushed for him and his mom loved him." Her words were a testament to the love she had for Jacoby, a love that had been tragically interrupted by his untimely death. As she prepared to say goodbye to her son, the community gathered in support, reinforcing the shared sorrow that bound them together in the wake of a devastating loss. As we reflect on the tragedy that unfolded on Christmas Eve in Rosedale, it's impossible to ignore the lasting impact it had on the Marcelle family and the entire community. The loss of Jacoby, a young boy full of promise, has left a deep wound that will never fully heal. His family, particularly Promyss, is left to pick up the pieces of a life that was so violently ripped away. But beyond the pain and heartbreak, there is a larger lesson to be learned here. Domestic violence is an insidious issue that affects countless families, often behind closed doors. It is a tragedy that doesn't discriminate, and for many, it takes a devastating event to bring these hidden struggles into the light. The case of Promyss Marcelle and her children serves as a painful reminder that we must all do more to raise awareness about domestic violence, to offer support to those at risk, and to ensure that no one has to suffer in silence. For Promyss, Jacoby, and the countless others who have been affected by domestic violence, their stories must not be forgotten, and their message must resonate. Together, we can work toward a world where families are safe and where tragedies like this no longer happen. If you or someone you know is experiencing domestic violence, please reach out to local resources or organizations for help. No one should have to suffer in silence. Share your thoughts and help spread awareness. Your voice can make a difference. To Promyss, her surviving daughter, friends, and loved ones, our deepest condolences. Jacoby did not deserve what happened to him. He should still be here for his mother and little sister, living his life, chasing his dreams, and sharing his light with the world. May you continue to heal, and may you find peace in the midst of this unimaginable loss. Thanks for watching. If you like stories like this, support our channel by subscribing and turning on the notification bell icon so that you'll be notified whenever we release new videos like this.